Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
Today, we're diving into something really fundamental, as old as human thinking itself, philosophy.
Exactly. Just picture it. Way before telescopes, before textbooks, early humans looking up at the sky
Mm-hmm.
and just asking, where did all this come from?
Yep.
What is all this? It wasn't just history. It was everything.
That's it. And for ages, the answers were myths, right? These big stories about cosmic eggs or gods battling it out.
Powerful stories.
Incredibly powerful, gave meaning. But then something shifted. A few people started asking, not who made the world, but what it's made of.
The big change.
Yeah, looking for patterns, physical stuff. That leap, really, from myth to method, that's where philosophy gets started. It's the bedrock of reasoning.
And that's kind of our mission today, isn't it? We've sifted through just tons of philosophical ideas, ancient stuff, modern theories,
Everything we could find.
and we're boiling it down, giving you the essentials. Think of it like a fast track to humanity's oldest quest for understanding.
Right, and we'll hit some surprising facts, connect it to your world today. We'll look at the origins, different traditions globally, the core questions.
And how it still helps us navigate, well, life, which is pretty complex.
It is. The philosopher Wilfrid Sellars put it nicely. He said philosophy's aim is to understand how things, in the broadest possible sense of the term, hang together.
The broadest possible sense of the term.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. It's wide open. It doesn't shut any doors.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Starting way back,
Yeah.
the dawn of reason in the West.
Mhm.
We're talking, what, around 600 BCE?
Miletus.
Miletus, yeah.
Yeah.
And the first name usually mentioned is Thales.
Thales, right. So people see rocks, rivers. He sees a question.
A huge question. What's
Well,
it all
it's-
made of, fundamentally?
And his answer, well, it seems a bit funny now.
Water. He said it's all water.
Water. Why water?
Well, think about it. It was everywhere, right? Rain, seas, life needs it, and crucially, it changes forms.
Ah, liquid, solid, gas. Exactly. Liquid, ice, vapor. So it wasn't just describing things. He was trying to explain the world with a single observable thing. No gods needed. That's the revolutionary bit.
Okay, so from one substance,
Mm-hmm.
things get more complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's this big debate about change itself, right? Heraclitus.
Heraclitus, yeah, around 500 BCE, he looked around and just saw constant flux, motion everywhere.
Everything flows.
Everything shifts. For him, change wasn't weird, it was the rule. Like trying to step in the same river twice. You can't.
But it wasn't just chaos.
No, he thought there were patterns. Opposites holding each other in tension like day and night. And he had this idea of the logos.
Logos.
Yeah, like a hidden rational principle, something guiding all the change, keeping it from being pure randomness. It really made people think hard about impermanence.
Okay, and then the complete opposite view comes along, Parmenides.
Parmenides, around the same time, but totally different take. He thought our senses, totally unreliable, misleading us.
So don't trust what you see.
Nope. Trust only pure reason. And reason, he argued, tells us something shocking. Change is impossible. It's an illusion.
Whoa. How did he figure that?
His logic was kind of fierce. He said, something can't come from nothing.
Right. Okay, makes sense.
So if something changes, it means it becomes what it wasn't.
Right.
But where did that new thing come from? It had to come from nothing, which is impossible. Therefore, he concluded, reality must be one single, unchanging, eternal thing, even if it looks like things are changing.
That's a lot to swallow.
Yeah.
Based purely on logic.
Absolutely. It forced everyone after him to take reason super seriously, even when it seemed to fly in the face of everyday experience.
So if change is an illusion, according to Parmenides,
Mm-hmm.
how did thinkers like Democritus deal with it? Because things clearly do seem to change.
Right, that was the challenge. And Democritus, around the 5th century BCE, came up with this brilliant idea. It feels incredibly modern.
What was it?
Atoms. He said everything is made of tiny, invisible, indivisible particles, atoms moving around in empty space, the void.
So not one substance, but little building blocks.
Exactly. Different atoms have different shapes. They tumble around in the void. They combine. They separate. And that's what creates everything we see and experience. Change, motion, different materials. It's all just atoms rearranging.
That's incredible for 5th century BCE.
It really is. It explained change without needing magic, and it laid some serious groundwork for science much, much later.
Okay, moving beyond just the material stuff. Pythagoras. We know the theorem, but he was more than that.
Oh, much more. He saw mathematics as the key to the whole universe. He believed nature itself operated on mathematical principles, that there was this underlying harmony, this rational structure to everything.
Numbers rule the world.
In a sense, yes. But here's a fascinating little side note about that famous theorem.
Yeah.
Well, evidence shows the Babylonians and Egyptians knew about those geometric relationships, like over 1,000 years before Pythagoras.
No way. So he didn't invent it.
Probably not invent it from scratch. It's more likely he learned about it during his studies, possibly in Egypt, and then maybe formalized it or integrated it into his broader system.
That really shows how ideas travel, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It wasn't all just happening in Greece. There was this flow of knowledge across ancient cultures.
Which brings us neatly to the absolute giants of Western thought, starting with Socrates.
Socrates, 470 to 399 BCE. The guy wrote nothing down himself.
Strange for such an influential figure. We know him mostly through Plato.
Mostly through Plato, yeah. His whole thing was questioning. Relentless questioning, the Socratic method.
Right, trying to get people to examine their own beliefs.
Exactly. Poke holes in assumptions, expose contradictions, guide them towards figuring things out for themselves if they were wanting to admit they might be wrong.
Humility was key.
Definitely. And he had these really strong moral ideas like the unexamined life is not worth living.
A classic.
And controversial ones too, like nobody willingly chooses to do bad things because doing bad harms your own soul, and harming others ultimately harms yourself.
Deep stuff. And Plato, his student, ran with these ideas.
He did, and built this incredible philosophical system. Plato's big idea is the theory of forms.
The forms. Okay, what are those?
Think of perfect, unchanging concepts. Like there's the perfect idea of chairness or justice or beauty. These forms exist in a separate, invisible reality, more real than the physical world we see.
So the chairs we sit on are just copies, imperfect copies.
Exactly, imperfect shadows of the true form of chairness. Our minds recognize things like chairs because somehow our souls remember these perfect forms from before we were born.
So learning is really remembering.
That was Plato's view. Recollection. It's an inner journey to access knowledge the soul already possesses. His allegory of the cave illustrates this perfectly.
The prisoners watching shadows.
Right. They think the shadows are reality. But the philosopher escapes the cave, sees the real world, the forms, illuminated by the sun, which represents the form of the good.
And he criticized people stuck in the shadows like the sophists.
He did. He thought they dealt only in appearances, not truth. And it's interesting, some scholars see echoes of ancient Egyptian ideas in Plato's metaphysics, this concept of a single, unseen source manifesting in different forms.
Another cross-cultural connection. Okay, so if Plato was about abstract forms, his student Aristotle, he went a different way.
Completely different. Aristotle, 384 BCE, was the ultimate observer, the biologist, the logician. He was fascinated by the physical world. Knowledge starts here with what we can sense.
Less escaping the cave, more cataloging what's inside it?
Kind of. He wanted to understand how things work in this world. His famous four causes are a great example. To really understand something, say a wooden table, you need to know its material cause, what it's made of wood, its formal cause, its shape or blueprint, the design of a table, its efficient cause, who or what made it, the carpenter, and its final cause, its purpose or telos to hold things.
That's very thorough, covers all the bases.
It's a framework for understanding anything's existence and function. Very systematic.
And what about living a good life for Aristotle?
The goal was eudaimonia, usually translated as flourishing or living well.
Flourishing, how do you achieve that?
Through balance, the golden mean, avoiding extremes, and crucially, by cultivating virtues, courage, temperance, justice. And since our unique function as humans is reason, flourishing involves perfecting our rationality.
So reason is key to living well. Did he think animals could flourish?
He had this idea of nested souls. Plants have a nutritive soul, growth. Animals have that plus a sensitive soul, movement, desire. Humans have all that but a rational soul. So only humans could achieve eudaimonia in the full sense through reason. His focus was very much on this world.
Fascinating. Okay, let's broaden our horizons now. Ancient China had totally different but equally deep traditions. Confucius.
Confucius, 6th century BCE, same time as the Buddha, roughly. He looked around at the chaos and the social breakdown of his time and thought, we need to fix this. Very practical.
Not about metaphysics, but about society.
Exactly. How do we restore order and trust? He focused on core relationships, ruler-subject, parent-child, husband-wife, etc. And two key concepts, Li and Ren.
Li and Ren.
Li is like ritual propriety, the right way to behave in everyday situations, showing respect. It's the social glue. Ren is humaneness, benevolence, kindness. The goal was to cultivate virtuous people who would then create a harmonious society. Community first.
And then you have Laozi and Taoism, offering a contrast.
Big contrast. Laozi, maybe also 6th century BCE, though it's debated, the Tao Te Ching. While Confucius focused on society, Laozi focused on harmony with nature.
The Tao.
The Tao, or the way. It's this underlying natural principle, like Heraclitus's logos, that governs everything, but you can't really name it or grasp it directly.
So how do you live well, according to Taoism?
By understanding the Tao and not fighting against the current of nature. Effortless action, spontaneity, letting go of rigid plans and desires. Wu Wei. It often involves downplaying the individual self, blending with the natural flow. Very different feel from Confucianism.
And there were other schools too, right? Like
Yeah.
Mohism.
Right, Mohism founded by Mozi. It was an early form of consequentialism, judging actions by their outcomes. They argued for impartial care, universal love for everyone, not just your family or state, because that would lead to the best overall benefit for society. Quite radical.
Interesting. And this idea of sages being linked to practical things.
Yeah, Chinese traditions celebrated legendary sages associated with key inventions or societal advancements, the nest builder, the fire maker, the flood controller. It shows this link between wisdom and practical civilization building skills.
Okay, let's shift to ancient India. The Vedas, Hinduism, karma. Huge concepts.
Foundational texts, the Vedas, maybe around 900 BCE or even earlier. Deep reflections on the self, Atman, ultimate reality, Brahman, and this idea of karma.
Karma being cause and effect across lifetimes.
Essentially, yeah. A cosmic law where your actions, good or bad, create consequences that shape your future experiences, even into future rebirths, samsara. The goal often being moksha, liberation from this cycle.
And Buddhism emerges from this context.
Right. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, 6th, 5th century BCE, he offered a different path to liberation based on his own enlightenment. Starts with the 4 noble truths.
The first being...
Life is suffering. Dukkha.
That sounds pessimistic.
Well, it's more nuanced. Dukkha isn't just pain. It's the dissatisfaction, the unease that comes from impermanence, things changing, ending. It also comes from the interconnectedness, how things depend on other things. Nothing is truly solid or independent.
So how do you escape this suffering?
By understanding its cause, craving, and attachment, especially attachment to a permanent self, which Buddhists argue doesn't really exist on Atman, the path involves extinguishing that craving, letting go of the illusion of self, which leads to nirvana, liberation.
Removing the self to ease suffering. Profoundly different from Western individualism. Let's touch on Africa. We mentioned Egypt's possible influence on Plato.
Yes, that idea of the one in the millions, a single hidden source expressing itself in many forms, is a fascinating parallel to Greek metaphysics. Shows complex philosophical ideas were developing there, too.
And the concept of Ubuntu.
Ubuntu, primarily from Southern Africa. It's a rich concept, often translated as humanity or I am because we are.
Interconnectedness again.
Deeply. It emphasizes our moral bonds, compassion, community. A person is a person through other persons. It's a powerful communitarian ethic.
Moving across the Atlantic, Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztecs had writing, so we have some insight.
We do. Particularly with the Aztecs, there's this central concept, titol.
Titol, what is that?
It's not really a substance like water or atoms. It's more like a dynamic, sacred energy or process that is the universe. It's constantly unfolding, creating, and destroying.
What's both the stuff and the force making the stuff?
Exactly. An immanent, all-encompassing force, and their view of time was cyclical, tied into this endless process of titol and manifesting itself.
Wow. Okay, let's jump forward to the medieval period. A bridge between ancient and modern.
Definitely a bridge, and a period of incredible synthesis, especially in the Islamic Golden Age. Figures like Al-Farabi, who they called the second master after Aristotle.
High praise.
It was. He engaged deeply with Greek philosophy, especially politics, and then Avicenna or Ibn Sina, just a giant.
What were his key ideas?
He made this crucial distinction between a thing's essence, what it is, and its existence, that it is. He argued only God has necessary existence. God's essence is existence. Everything else is contingent, dependent on God.
That's a powerful argument for God.
It was hugely influential, and his floating man thought experiment. Imagine someone created floating, no senses working. Would they know they exist? Avicenna said yes, they'd be aware of their own consciousness. An argument for the mind being distinct from the body.
Mind-body dualism, even before Descartes.
Then in Christian Europe, you get scholasticism. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century.
Aquinas. synthesizing Aristotle with Christianity.
Brilliantly. He adapted Aristotle's logic and metaphysics to build arguments for Christian doctrines. His 5 ways to prove God's existence are famous arguments from motion, causation, contingency, perfection, design. They shaped Western theology for centuries.
And Jewish philosophy. Maimonides.
Moses Maimonides,
Yeah.
12th century, a towering figure, known for his somewhat radical negative theology.
Negative theology.
Yeah. He argued, we can't really say what God is because God is so far beyond our comprehension. We can only really say what God is not. God is not limited, not physical, not changing. It emphasizes divine transcendence and human intellectual limits.
Fascinating. Okay, this sets the stage for modernity. Reason, experience the self.
Yeah.
Huge shifts. Descartes kicks it off.
René Descartes, 17th century. He wanted certainty. In an age of doubt, he asked, what can I know for sure? What if everything I think I know is wrong?
Radical doubt.
Total doubt, doubted his senses, even mathematics. But he realized he couldn't doubt the fact that he was doubting.
The famous line.
I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. That became his bedrock of certainty. Thinking proves existence. This really elevated reason as the path to truth, that's rationalism, and it cemented that mind-body dualism idea. The thinking mind is separate from the physical body.
Then Spinoza takes things in a wild direction.
Baruch Spinoza, also 17th century, absolutely radical. He looked at Descartes' dualism and said, nope, mind, body, God, nature. It's all one thing, one infinite substance.
God is nature, pantheism.
Exactly. God isn't a separate creator. God is the universe and all its laws. Everything that happens is a necessary part of this single divine substance unfolding rationally, a profoundly unified and controversial vision.
Okay, shifting to politics. Thomas Hobbes. He wasn't exactly an optimist about human nature.
Not at all. 17th century England was chaotic, civil war. Hobbes looked at that and theorized about the state of nature, life without government.
And it wasn't pretty.
He famously called it a war of every man against every man, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Constant fear.
So what's the solution?
The social contract. People agree to give up some freedom, submit to an absolute sovereign, a monarch, basically in exchange for security and order. Self-preservation is the driving force. It's about escaping the horror of the state of nature.
And John Locke, coming slightly later, had a very different view of that contract.
Totally different starting point. Locke, also 17th century, believed people have natural rights before government even exists. Rights to life, liberty, and property.
Inherent rights.
Yes. And the purpose of government, formed by consent of the governed, is to protect those rights. If the government violates the contract, fails to protect rights,
And people can change it.
they have the right to alter or abolish it. Huge influence on democratic revolutions, like in America. Locke also had a big impact on how we think about knowledge. He was an empiricist,
Empiricist, meaning...
meaning knowledge comes from experience, through our senses. He argued the mind at birth is a tabula rasa.
a blank slate.
Exactly. No innate ideas. Everything we know is built up from sensory experience and reflection on that experience. Big contrast to Descartes' rationalism.
Okay, rounding out the Enlightenment. Immanuel Kant, 18th century. A real game changer.
Huge. Kant tried to synthesize rationalism and empiricism. He read the empiricist David Hume, who questioned if we could really know things like cause and effect, and it woke Kant from his dogmatic slumber, as he put it.
So how did he bridge the gap?
He argued, yes, knowledge starts with experience, but our minds aren't just blank slates passively receiving it. Our minds actively structure that experience.
So?
Concepts like space, time, cause, and effect. Kant argued these aren't things we discover out there in the world. They are fundamental categories built into our minds, the lenses through which we must experience reality. We impose that structure.
Wow. So we shape our own reality, in a way.
Our experience of it, yes. And in ethics, he's equally monumental. He gave us the categorical imperative.
The universal rule.
Right. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Basically, only do things you could rationally want everyone to do in that situation.
And treating people as ends.
Yes. Never merely as a means to an end. Because humans possess reason and autonomy, they have inherent dignity and worth, foundational for modern human rights thinking.
Okay, let's push into the 19th century. Things get dynamic. Hegel and history.
Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, early 19th century. Super ambitious thinker. He saw history itself as a rational process unfolding over time.
How does it unfold?
Through a dialectic. An idea or situation, the thesis, generates its opposite, the antithesis, and the conflict between them leads to a resolution, a higher stage, the synthesis, which then becomes a new thesis, and so on.
A constant process of conflict and progress.
Towards greater freedom and self-consciousness for Hegel, it drives everything from individual minds to world history, moving towards a final realization of spirit or Geist. Very complex, very influential.
And Karl Marx took that dialectic idea.
And flipped it. Marx loved Hegel's dialectic, but thought Hegel had it upside down. It wasn't about ideas driving history, it was about material conditions, economics.
That struggle.
Exactly. History is the history of class struggle, masters and slaves, lords and serfs, and now capitalists, bourgeoisie, and workers, proletariat. Capitalism, for Marx, contained its own contradictions, exploitation, alienation, generating surplus value off the workers.
Leading inevitably to
Revolution. The proletariat would overthrow the bourgeoisie, leading eventually to a classless communist society. His ideas obviously had an earth-shattering impact on the 20th century.
Understatement. Okay, who else in the 19th century? Schopenhauer. More pessimistic.
Arthur Schopenhauer, way more pessimistic. He looked at the world and saw not reason unfolding, but this blind, irrational, striving force underlying everything. He called it the will.
The will.
Yeah, this constant, pointless striving, desiring. And because desire is never permanently satisfied, it's the ultimate source of all suffering. Life is mostly pain, punctuated by brief moments of relief, influenced Nietzsche quite a bit.
Yikes. A brighter view with John Stuart Mill.
Definitely. Mill, a key figure in British empiricism and liberalism, he's famous for utilitarianism.
The greatest good for the greatest number.
That's the core idea. Actions are morally right if they tend to promote overall happiness and wrong if they tend to produce unhappiness. It's about consequences.
And he was big on individual liberty.
Hugely. His harm principle is crucial. The only justification for society interfering with an individual's liberty is to prevent harm to others. Your own good isn't enough reason. He championed free speech, diversity of lifestyles, arguing they were essential for progress and finding truth.
And briefly, Kierkegaard, Seeds of Existentialism.
Søren Kierkegaard, yeah. Focused on the individual, subjectivity, choice, anxiety, the burden of freedom, a reaction against Hegel's grand system. He emphasized the leap of faith required for religious belief. Definitely a precursor to 20th century existentialism.
Which brings us to the 20th century. Philosophy kind of splits. Analytic versus continental.
That's the common narrative, yeah. A broad divergence. Analytic philosophy, mostly in the UK and US, really doubled down on logic, language, clarity, trying to solve or dissolve philosophical problems through careful analysis.
Key figures.
Ludwig Wittgenstein is huge. Early on, he thought language mirrored the logical structure of the world. Later, he shifted, arguing meaning comes from how words are used in specific contexts, language games. Many philosophical problems, he thought, were just linguistic confusions. W.V. Quine also challenged neat distinctions, arguing knowledge is a holistic web of belief.
So, very focused on language and logic. What about the continental side?
Continental philosophy is more of an umbrella term for various movements, often originating in France and Germany: phenomenology, existentialism, structuralism, post-structuralism, critical theory, generally more focused on lived experience, history, society, power, subjectivity.
Like Sartre.
Jean-Paul Sartre, the face of existentialism. His famous line, "Existence precedes essence." We're born, then we define ourselves through our choices. There's no pre-given human nature or purpose. We're condemned to be free and totally responsible for what we become. Avoiding that responsibility is bad faith.
Intense. And Foucault on power.
Michel Foucault was revolutionary. He argued power isn't just top-down, held by the state. It's dispersed throughout society, in institutions, in knowledge itself. Power shapes how we think, what counts as truth, what's normal. His genealogies traced how concepts like madness or sexuality were historically constructed.
Revealing hidden power structures. What about Derrida and deconstruction? Sounds complicated.
Jacques Derrida challenged the idea that language gives us stable meanings. He argued language is inherently slippery, full of gaps and contradictions. Deconstruction is a way of reading texts closely to reveal these instabilities, showing how meaning is never fully present, always deferred. His concept of difference challenges neat interpretations.
And Judith Butler on gender.
Judith Butler took these ideas further, arguing gender isn't a biological fact or inner essence, but something we perform through our actions, speech, gestures, based on social norms. It's constructed, not fixed. This opened up huge discussions about gender identity and fluidity.
And Baudrillard, hyperreality. Sounds like The Matrix.
Jean Baudrillard explored how, in our media-saturated world, the lines blur between reality and simulations, images, media representations. He talked about hyper-reality, where the simulation becomes more real than the real. Think reality TV, theme parks, online avatars. The map precedes the territory.
Mind-bending stuff. Okay, so with all these complex ideas, what are the basic tools philosophers use to actually do philosophy?
Well, the absolute foundation is logic and argumentation. Logic is the toolbox for distinguishing good reasoning from bad. An argument isn't just yelling, it's providing premises, reasons to support a conclusion. And they look for coherence. Do someone's beliefs logically hang together?
How do they test arguments?
A really powerful tool is the counterexample. If someone makes a general claim like all swans are white, you just need to find one black swan to refute it. In arguments, you look for a scenario where the premises could be true, but the conclusion false. It's a great way to expose flaws.
Simple but effective. And thought experiments, like the ship of Theseus.
Exactly. Thought experiments are crucial. They're imaginative scenarios designed to isolate a concept and test our intuitions. The ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of a ship over time, is it still the same ship? Challenges ideas about identity. Or the brain in a vat. How do you know you're not just a brain being fed experiences by a computer? Test skepticism.
That gets you thinking. Are there tools for avoiding bad thinking, biases?
Definitely. Philosophy encourages metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. Recognizing cognitive biases is key, like confirmation bias, where we only look for evidence that supports what we already believe.
We all do that sometimes.
Or the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less you know about something, the more confident you might feel about it because you don't even know what you don't know. Philosophy pushes for that self-awareness, that critical reflection on how we arrive at our beliefs.
And what's this biting the bullet thing? Sounds painful.
It means accepting an unwelcome or counterintuitive consequence of a view you hold because you think the value is correct overall for other reasons. If you're committed to determinism, you might have to bite the bullet and accept that free will is an illusion, even if that feels wrong. It shows intellectual honesty following the logic where it leads.
Okay, so philosophy isn't just abstract. Let's talk about it in action. Bioethics seems huge now.
Absolutely. Technology constantly throws up new ethical dilemmas. Abortion debates often hinge on the philosophical concept of personhood. When does a fetus acquire moral status and rights? How you define that deeply affects your stance.
And end-of-life issues.
Euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. Philosophers analyze the distinctions, weigh arguments about autonomy, suffering, the sanctity of life, the role of doctors, potential slippery slopes. Very difficult territory.
Clinical trials too, right? Using human subjects.
Big ethical questions there. Informed consent, fairness in who participates, balancing potential benefits against risks. Kant's idea of not treating people merely as means to an end is central. And looking forward, human augmentation, gene editing, cognitive enhancement.
Cure diseases, but maybe increase inequality.
That's the worry. If these powerful technologies are only for the rich, it could create huge divides. Ethicists are grappling with fairness, access, and what it even means to be human if we start redesigning ourselves.
Environmental ethics is another critical area.
Yes, there's been a big shift. From purely anthropocentric views where nature only matters for human use towards recognizing the intrinsic value of ecosystems, species, the non-human world, deep ecology.
People like Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson.
Early pioneers raising awareness. Now, with climate change, philosophers are crucial in analyzing our responsibilities to future generations, to other species, and defining what sustainable and just relationships with the planet look like.
How about business? Can philosophy help there?
Business ethics explores questions like, what's the purpose of a corporation? Is it just maximizing profit for shareholders, like Milton Friedman argued?
Or are there other responsibilities? To employees, society, the environment?
Exactly. What constitutes meaningful work? Adam Smith himself worried that too much specialization would make work soul-crushing, and debates about affirmative action weighing merit against goals like diversity and correcting past injustices are deeply philosophical.
And finally, political philosophy. Power, justice.
Core questions. What makes a government legitimate? Tradition, charisma, rational laws agreed upon by the people, like in social contract theory. Hannah Arendt's analysis of totalitarianism as something fundamentally new, aiming to destroy individuality itself, is chillingly relevant.
What about justice? How should society be organized?
John Rawls's theory of justice as fairness is hugely influential. His idea is, imagine you're designing society from behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing your own position in it.
So you'd want fair rules for everyone.
Right. She argues we'd choose two principles. First, equal basic liberties for all. Second, social and economic inequalities are only okay if they benefit the least advantaged members of society and are attached to positions open to all. It tries to address unfairness baked into the system.
And anarchism fits in here too. No government at all.
Anarchism is the view that we don't need a centralized state. Society could be organized through voluntary cooperation. It's often associated with violence, but many anarchists advocate nonviolent resistance and building alternative, decentralized structures. It challenges fundamental assumptions about authority.
So ripping this all up, philosophy is clearly not some dusty, irrelevant subject.
Not at all. From its beginnings, questioning the stars, to grappling with AI ethics today, it's this continuous human quest to understand ourselves and our world. It's not about finding final answers, maybe.
More about the questioning.
The persistent questioning, the clarifying, the reasoning. And learning how to do that well really strengthens your own thinking. Problem solving, articulating ideas, persuading others. These are skills philosophy hones.
Critical thinking, basically. Essential now more than ever.
Couldn't agree more.
So, as we finish this deep dive, maybe a final thought for everyone listening. We live in this age of information overload, right? Where reality and simulation sometimes feel... People even seriously discuss the simulation hypothesis. New tech keeps challenging what human means. So the question is, what responsibility do you have to really examine how you think? How can using these philosophical tools, not just looking for answers, but really questioning, evaluating assumptions, help you lead a more examined life, and maybe even help contribute in your own way to a more thoughtful, just world? Something to chew on.